Welcome to the Wizard of Ing. This is a follow-up video to the original The Wizard of Ish. And today we're talking about the suffix ing, ing, which is very common in English. It is very important, and sometimes it's a little confusing. So let's look at how we use ing in English. Actually, we use it in 4 different ways. The one you're probably most familiar with is as a verb. We use it as a noun, which we call a gerund. But there's also a verbal noun, which is a different kind of thing, and it's also a participle. Now, inevitably, we're going to have to talk a little bit of grammar in this lesson, but I promise you it will be a little bit, and we'll keep it as simple as possible. So let's talk about the one we are probably most familiar with, which is using ing as a verb or in a verb. So let's look at it. The great thing about this is it's consistent. It's always the same. Whenever we use a continuous tense, also known as a progressive tense, we will always use the appropriate part of the verb to be, and the action verb will always end in ing. It's that simple. So let's take a look. Here we have the verb to walk. On the left, we see the wizard. He might say, I am walking. He is walking along. That's the present continuous. I am walking. The verb to be, I am. The action verb to walk, ending in ing. And it's always the same. I am walking. I was walking, the past continuous. And I will be walking, the future continuous. I will be walking to work in the morning, for example. So that's the first person of the verb to walk. But let's look at the second person. Perhaps as he's walking along, the wizard is thinking, and he might say, or we might say, he is thinking, present continuous. Or he was thinking, he will be thinking, the past continuous and the future continuous. It's always the same. The appropriate part of the verb to be and the action verb ends in ing. Always. Same in the third party. You sing. Now, this is an interesting word. The verb to sing ends in ing, but it makes no difference. You are singing, you were singing, and you will be singing. Present continuous, past continuous, future continuous, it's always the same. The verb to be plus the action verb ending in ing, even if it already ends in ing. Okay, so that's a verb. What about a gerund? Again, don't worry about it. You will never use the word gerund outside a grammar lesson. It's not something you hear in common English, but it's something we do have to understand. It's probably the second most common way where we see and use the suffix ing. The great thing here is that all gerunds end with ing, and they are formed with verbs, but they act as nouns. I'll explain this a little bit more in just a moment. But the important thing is to be able to find gerunds in sentences and to be able to create them. But when you're looking at a piece of writing and you want to find the gerunds, then look for something which is a verb plus ing, so walking, for example, but look at where it is used as a noun and where it is not part of a continuous tense verb. So it's not accompanied by a part of the verb to be. Okay, let's again look at some examples. I am walking. Well, we know that one. We had that one earlier on. That's just the present continuous. It's very easy. But if I say something a little bit different and say, I enjoy walking, here the verb is enjoy. It's not a continuous tense. And so enjoy is the verb, walking becomes the gerund. What is it I enjoy? I enjoy walking. Walking acts as a noun, and we call it a gerund. Now, let's look at another example. I was swimming earlier. Once again, this is continuous tense. It's the past continuous. I was swimming. Okay, but equally, we could write something like swimming is a sport. It's the same word. Swimming is the same in both sentences, but in the second sentence, it is not accompanied by the verb to be. It is not a continuous tense. It is actually the subject of this sentence, and therefore it is acting as a noun, and so swimming here is the gerund. Now, the easy way to think about all this, to understand this, is that when we use swimming, for example, as a verb, it is something we do, and when we use it as a gerund, as a noun, it is something we know about. So, I was swimming, something we do. Swimming is a sport, something we know. That's one way to distinguish between the verbs and the gerunds, or the noun form. So here are a few sentences, and these are full of ing endings. So how do we tell what they are? Well, the first thing to do, actually, is to look for the verbs. Look at these sentences and see, well, where are the verbs in here? Let's have a look. So in the first one, the first sentence is, swimming in the ocean has been Sharon's passion since she was 5 years old. Okay. So the verbs are has been and was, and right at the beginning is swimming. So, is swimming part of a continuous tense activity? No, it's not. In the second sense, the verb is delayed. In the third sentence, actually, we do have a continuous tense, I am enjoying. So I am enjoying is the verb. Swimming is in there, but it's not part of the continuous tense verb. And in the fourth sentence at the bottom, Bill avoided is the verb, but it's not an ing verb. However, let's look at it again. Those are the verbs, so we now know where the verbs are, and now we can identify the ing endings, and in here they are all gerunds. So in the first one we have swimming. Swimming is the action. It's not me actually doing it. We're talking about swimming as a hobby, if you like. So swimming is a noun. It's a gerund. Swimming in the ocean has been Sharon's passion since she was 5 years old. I delayed. What did I delay? Telling Jerry the bad news. Telling acts as a noun. I am enjoying. That's the present continuous. What am I enjoying? I am enjoying swimming these days. Swimming is the noun form. And then the last one, Bill avoided. What did Bill avoid? He avoided doing his math assignment because the World Series was on. So doing his math assignment, doing in there acts as a noun. So that's what we call the gerund form. Again, don't worry about the word gerund. Just think of it as a verb form acting as a noun. Now, we also actually have real verbal nouns. Verbal nouns are nouns which are formed from a verb root, but which are simple nouns. They're not verbs acting as nouns, which is what makes up a gerund. Now, verbal nouns take many forms, and only some of them end with ing. So, for example, we have the wizard here walking along. We could say he is going for a walk. A walk is a verbal noun. It's a noun which comes from the verb to walk. I am going to walk to the school. I am going for a walk. It comes from the same source. So there are many, many verbal nouns, and only some of them end with ing. And let's have a look at some of those. So here's a sentence, I was painting a picture. That's the past continuous. Or we could say, I find painting enjoyable. So here again we have the gerund where painting is acting as a noun. an activity. And then the last one we have here is I like that painting. And in the last sentence here, painting is just a noun. It's what we call a verbal noun. I like that painting, the verbal noun. So we can say I was painting, past continuous. I find painting enjoyable, using the gerund. Or we can say I like that painting. Painting is a verbal noun. So let's have a look at some verbal nouns here. We have 5 different sentences. Let's look at the verbal nouns in each of them. So in the first sentence, we have, that is a very nice painting. Painting is a verbal noun. Second sentence, we're going to see the changing of the guard. The changing of the guard, changing is part of the phrase changing of the guard. It's a ceremony that happens in London every day, and it comes from the verb to change. In the middle there we have, after a slow beginning, the show got a bit more lively. Beginning is a verbal noun that comes from the verb to begin. And the next one, the story has a rather unexpected ending. Ending is a verbal noun that comes from the verb to end. The last one I think is particularly interesting. The last meeting was not very productive. We always think of meetings as being business things where we sit down and do business and discuss business and organize things. But of course, it actually comes from the verb to meet. I was walking along the street and I met someone. So a meeting was originally just 2 people coming together, but the word meeting has come to mean a business process. But it still comes from the original English verb to meet. So those are verbal nouns. There are hundreds of them, thousands of them, and only some of them end in ing. But now we have to talk about the participle. And participles are difficult, so let's try to keep it as simple as possible. Of course, keeping it simple means we're not going to go into great depth here. And if you want to know more about participles, there are lots of websites and books that you can look at to understand more about why we have participles and how they work. We're not going to go into them in great depth here. We're just trying to make sure you understand what a participle is and how we use it as far as the suffix ing is concerned. So, we all know already about the past participle. Whenever we're talking about a verb, we say the infinitive is to paint, the past tense is I painted, and the past participle is painted. And in regular verbs, the simple past is always the same as the past participle. In irregular verbs, it's a little bit different. So for example, to give, which is a regular, I gave, and the past participle is given. But this is one of the ways we define verbs, if you like. Whenever we talk about a verb, these are the 3 things that we mention. However, here we are looking at and we want to know about the present participle, which is much less discussed, but which is very, very important. Now, the great thing is that the present participle always ends in ing. So we looked earlier at the past continuous sentence, I was painting a picture. The past continuous always ends in ing because the past continuous, all the continuous tenses, use the present participle. So in here, the word painting is actually the present participle. Okay, so that's the great thing. The whole thing about the participle is that we use it all the time. We don't necessarily know we're using it, but we do use it all the time. And whenever you're using a continuous tense, you're using the present participle as the action verb component of the continuous tense. I was painting. Now, so we have I was painting a picture, which was seen before, past continuous, but we also saw I find painting enjoyable, and I like that painting, the verbal noun. The great thing is that in fact they are all participles. So for the past continuous, painting is the present participle. Similarly for the gerund, we use the present participle, and for the verbal noun, although it's purely a noun, it's not a verb anymore, its stems, its root is the present participle. So basically every ing that you see out there are all derived from the present participle. Whether you're using it as a continuous tense verb, or it's a gerund, or it's a verbal noun, it all comes from the present participle. So how do we use the present participle itself? Well, mostly we use it as an adjective. So let me give you some examples of that. Let's take the verb to run. The present participle is running, and we might use it in a phrase like running water. Now, we can use running, I am running, I was running. Running is a great hobby. Those are what we've just seen, continuous tense, gerunds, that kind of thing. But here, we're using the present participle as an adjective, running water. So, here's another example, to flourish, which means to do well, to grow. And you could use that as an adjective, a flourishing business, a business which is doing well. Or we could say to discourage, and the present participle is discouraging, and we might say something like a discouraging look. He gave me a discouraging look, and I went away. So we can use the present participle on its own, purely as a participle, and we generally use it as an adjective to modify a noun, running water, a flourishing business, a discouraging look. There is another way which we can use the participle on its own, which is a thing called the participle phrase. Again, we could go into this in great depth. We don't have time here, and I don't want to bore you because maybe you're not that interested. But you do have to understand it because it's another way in which ing will appear in English language sentences. Let's consider the verb to rise, i.e. to get up or to move up. The present participle is rising. So we could have this sentence here. Rising out of the sea in front of us, the sun started to warm our faces. Now that's quite an artistic kind of sentence in English, but it's completely correct. It's completely acceptable. But it's using what's called the participle phrase. What we're actually saying here when we actually make this sentence is something which is a little bit different in terms of construction. The sun, which was rising out of the sea in front of us, started to warm our faces. The sun is the subject. The sun started to warm our faces. The central clause, which was rising out of the sea in front of us, is used as a description of what the sun was doing. It's a dependent clause. I'm not going to go into all the grammar that's involved in that, but when we're using our participle phrase, what we actually do is we cut out the which was, so we can use it to make our sentences a bit shorter, a bit tighter, a bit more controlled. And instead of saying the sun, which was rising out of the sea in front of us, started to warm our faces, we use the participle phrase, rising out of the sea in front of us, the sun started to warm our faces. It's an artistic way of doing it, it's a shorter way of doing it. I'm just making you aware that it happens. I don't expect you necessarily to use this too much unless you start doing some fairly artistic writing in English, just so that you're aware of the participle phrase. And that's it. The present participle always ends with ing. That's the thing to remember. So you can use it as a participle, which we just discussed, where we might typically use it as an adjective, but it appears also in the continuous tense verbs. And of course, it's what we use as the gerund, as the verb which is taking a noun form. And it's also the root of the verbal nouns that end in ing. All of them come from the present participle. So hopefully you've now got a little bit of an understanding of how we use ing, where it comes from, and the different parts of language where ing appears. But it always comes from the present participle. That's the key thing to remember. Now, there's one last thing that I want to cover with you. We talked about participles as adjectives, and actually, remember there's the past participle and the present participle. Now let's look at those. Here we have the verb to excite. The past participle is excited and the present participle is exciting. So for all regular verbs, this is true. And if we look, here's a whole other list of verbs, the past participle and the present participle. Bored and boring, tired and tiring, shocked and shocking, thrilled and thrilling, confused and confusing. Now, people quite often have difficulty understanding exactly how these work and what the relationship is between them. What's the relationship between excited and exciting, between shocked and shocking? Well, it's actually very simple. The past participle is always internal and the present participle is always external. I am excited. He is bored. They are tired. We're always talking about people. It's how we feel inside or how someone feels inside. So the way you can think about it is using a past participle as an adjective, it's always used to describe an internal status. Using the present participle, the ing ending, exciting, boring, tiring, etc., we're always talking about something external. That was exciting. This film is really boring. I found that journey very tiring. This lesson is very confusing. I hope that's not true, but whatever, ed is internal, ing is always external. That's the way to tell the difference and to think about the difference between the past participle adjectives and the present participle adjectives. There's one more thing to think about. The past participle, by and large, only talks about people, and the present participle, the ing ending, can be used to talk about people and things. That's the generally accepted explanation. Personally, I think that there are some of the past participle, the ed endings, which can be used, for example, with animals. There's some debate over this, but I think you can tell when a dog is excited. I think you can tell when a cat is bored, which is most of the time. And you can, for example, say the horse, confused by the traffic and the noise, bolted into the field. So some of the past participles can be used for animals, for example, but overall they are only used to describe the emotions and the activities, the internal activities of people, whereas the ing endings, the present participle endings, can be used to talk about anything at all, people, things, everything. So that's just a quick explanation of the difference between the past participle adjectives and the present participle adjectives, the ed endings and the ing endings. And that's about it. This has been the Wizard of Ing. I hope you've enjoyed it. And if you have, then please feel free to have a look at all the other videos that are here on the Thinking English YouTube channel. Thank you very much.